Luffy's next Gear 4 form. As correctly explained by me back in May 2015, Luffy's Gear 4 has other forms to adapt to different situations. The main difference between Gear 4 and the other gears is the fact that this form has different situational forms to adapt to different fights. Due to the recent review about Tankman, I now believe that there is another final version of this form. This version of Gear 4, I will call it Champion Luffy. Does this sound familiar to you? Throughout the series, Luffy is often faced with opponents that require unusual methods to defeat. For this reason, he sometimes adapts certain forms aside from his gears forms intended to enable him to defeat those enemies. These situational forms can be compared to the Gear 4 forms as well. Let's take a look at the other forms, and this will give you a better understanding about how the Champion form will be the ultimate fighting form for Luffy. The first Gear 4 form we encountered is called Boundman. This was the first form we encountered when Luffy fought against Doflamingo. This form is created when Luffy blows an incredible amount of air into his body. He inflates his muscular structure before distributing the air throughout his body, with emphasis on his upper half. This form has the speed of Gear 2nd combined with the strength of Gear 3rd. Luffy's durability is also enhanced. Despite being hardened with Boshoshoku Haki, his body is still rubbery, so physical blows, even the ones enhanced with Haki, simply bounce off him. Though he has some heightened resistance to cutting attacks in this form, if an opponent using a blade weapon has Boshosho Haki of comparable or greater strength to Luffy's own, they will be able to cut through his coated arms with relative ease. When we first saw this form, we assumed it was based on that gorilla that Luffy trained with on Risukaina, but in fact, it was based on the real-life New Guardians. Please check out my video of that if you haven't already. But after the review of Tankman, I now understand that Boundman is based on Nightmare Luffy. With Luffy's strong spirit, he was able to contain 100 shadows within him, when most normal people could only contain 2 or 3. In this form, Luffy was several times bigger than his normal self and his skin turned completely blue. Now you have that in mind, we will now talk about Tankman. Luffy revealed another form of Gear 4 known as Tankman. In this form, he resembles a sumo wrestler with exaggerated proportions. While his arms and legs are slightly increased in size with muscle, his Boshosho Haki coated torso becomes far larger and completely round, though still muscular near the top. The first time this form was shown, Luffy has consumed a large amount of biscuits and consequently grew to an enormous and bloated size, and is referred to his version of Tankman as full version, so I believe there will be a perfect version of this as well. This form also resembles to Luffy's appearances when combined the strength of both his Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd into one before the time skip, and this was called Gigant Jet Shell. So again, this form has a combination between Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd advantages. Tankman gives Luffy incredible Haki based durability, while Cracker nearly cut through Luffy's Haki coated Boundman arm with his sword. Now, I'll explain what Tankman is based on, and that is Mizu Luffy. Though at first glance the form looks idiotic and somewhat flawed, as he had trouble keeping the water down, it allowed Luffy to safely store the water and spit it out at Crocodile for use. And now onto the final form and the main topic of this video, and that is Gear 4 Champion form. If we looked at this theory so far, we now understand that Luffy's form is based off the different Luffy forms that he used throughout the series. Please subscribe if you are still following this awesome video. So without further waiting, this is what Champion Luffy will look like. This champion form Luffy has armor on his arms and legs and potentially around his ribs. One of the main advantages of Gear 4's ability was to soak the damage of Haki attacks. So this form will have the same armor as well, but mainly on his arms and legs. This form is almost like the Afro Luffy form with the gloves, and also Champion Luffy when he received the Doru Doru Candle armor from Mr. Free. And if you can remember, Luffy was so happy when he had that armor. This form would not use the same amount of Haki as Boundman, so Luffy would not be as tired and he would not be so static as Tankman. This form would be great for countering hard hitters because he would be using his larger arms to protect himself, and he would be able to move the same speed as his normal self. If he does use this form against Kaido, I can imagine the fight can pan out to look like when Frankie was fighting against CP9's Fukuru, almost like a boxing match. With Luffy's new legs, I expect him to have a similar spring movement to Bellamy. Bellamy has eaten the Bane Nomi, a Paramasia devil fruit that grants him the ability to turn his body parts into whispering, allowing him to jump with great speed, height and force. With this form, due to only consuming Haki around his limbs, I hope we can see more combination of other gears into his form as well, with gear 2nd in mind. Imagine Champion Luffy has to finish all his opponents off and uses jet attacks to help. What do you think of this gear 4 final form? Do you think it's possible? What other forms do you think Luffy will have instead? Leave your comments down below. I'll see you next time, Flying Panda. And if you haven't seen it already, check out my PPA dance with my sisters that are done for fun.
Hey pineapple, apple.